Awesome. So let's get started. Oh, one more person. Okay, we'll wait for you. Okay, let's get started now. So, hey everyone, I'm Josh. I'm one of the academics on the Computing Society, and I'm running the React course for this year. It's a new course, and I'm really excited that able to make it and create it. So, today is the first session. It's on components, JSX, and state. And the plan for today is we're going to give you a course introduction. That's 5 minutes, the admin stuff, what you're going to learn, any important resources. Then we're going to dive into like a 10-minute crash course on React, giving you some of the theory, but it's going to be quite light, and just introduce a lot of the concepts that React brings with it. And then the rest of today is just going to be live programming, me and an editor, and it'll be really easy for you to follow along. More on that later. So start off with the aim of the course. I think it's quite self-explanatory. It's to provide a solid introduction to React. I want you to walk away from this being able to write your own React programs and actually understand how React works internally. Second point is to assist with module coursework and hackathons. If you're doing 139 in first year, this might be a great way to expand your knowledge in that module because you don't use any frameworks, at least we didn't last year. And of course, 261. Now, I don't really know how React helps with traffic junctions. If you're a second year, you know what that means. But I always see a React app in everything. And of course, hackathons. We have the greatest hackathon here called WAC. So there you go. And lastly, it's to help put my understanding to the test. As for schedule and resources, so this course runs from weeks 2 to 6, and it's at 6 to 7 p.m. except from today to avoid a clash with another event. 2 important resources are the course webpage, readytoreact.net. That's a proper site. You can find more about the course there. And of course, the official Computing Society webpage for any updates on the scheduling of the event. Session format. So all sessions except from today are going to be pretty much the same. We are going to do 10 minutes of introductory slides. That's just giving you the concepts for today. Then we're going to be doing bulk of the session is going to be 40 minutes of live programming. And then if there's time, we will have 5 minutes of React wisdom. That's just what I'm giving the name to, something to expand your knowledge with React, maybe a useful resource or library or specific technique. As for any requirements, not many, basic understanding of HTML and CSS. If you can name like 3 HTML tags and, 3 CSS properties, you're good to go on that front. Most important one is being familiar with JavaScript, especially the ES6 syntax. JavaScript is a React is a JavaScript library, so having that understanding would be great. But if you don't worry. And lastly, these aren't requirements that you need to know per se. When we encounter these, we will briefly explain them, but that's the document object model, asynchronous programming, closure, destructuring, and modules. But don't worry about those if you don't understand what they are. As for what you will learn the curation side of React. So I like to think there's 2 sides to building a user interface. There's the creating it, what it looks like. And then there's the optimizing side. Now, you don't really need to optimize that much with React because it's so fast. And that's why we're skipping it. We might touch upon it a little bit towards the end, but for now we're just going to be sticking to how you build things with React. You also learn the paradigm shift that comes with React. You have to reason about UIs in a different way. It's much different to using your plain JavaScript, HTML sort of thing. And there's this thing called the React way that I hope to teach you. And of course, useful libraries, techniques, and how to build something awesome. Now, as for you won't learn how to make user interfaces look nice. I think there's this misconception that using React suddenly makes your user interfaces look nice. That's sort of half true. It enables your UIs to look nicer by making your life easier as a developer. You also learn how to make your favorites. No, you won't learn your favorite style language, CSS. I know that is like the least popular thing in this university. So good news for you, all this CSS is pre-written. We're just going to be referencing classes that I've already written in the code. So hooray. And you won't learn any server-side programming. That's like the back end, login systems. We're completely focused on the front end side here. Briefly going to give you an outline of all the sessions. We'll fly through this. Today, it's just, the introduction, components, JSX state, brief introduction to React Fiber, more on that later. And the project for today, each session is going to sort of have a project. Is going to be replicating the course webpage if you haven't seen it already. Session 2 is going to be very important. It's going to be about rendering dynamic lists, keys, and more on this idea of state. We're also going to be covering controlled forms and handlers, and we're going to be creating a superior Quizlet. So, better flashcard app. And if you're a first year, you need to start thinking about your class tests. So you could use this for that, maybe not. Session 3 is split into 2 parts. So it's going to be session 3 and 4. This is going to be pretty big. We're going to be learning about handling side effects. This is one of the most confusing things that I think people encounter with React. And then, combined with that is dependencies, this idea of when we run our side effects. That's going to allow us to fetch data and manage complex state, and we're going to be creating the ultimate Wordle clone. So I'm sure everyone knows what Wordle is. Session 4 just follows from the previous one. Main point here is we're going to be learning about deploying our apps to the web. I think it's important to know how you get your code deployed, and that's like super simple. Session 5, this one I'm most excited for, is a bit of a wildcard session. We're going to be covering a lot of small things, so 20 minutes on this, 20 minutes on that. So we're going to be learning about routing, global state management, custom hooks. Don't worry if you don't know what those means. Briefly outline some advanced React techniques, such as the optimization side and helpful libraries, tools, and Now, briefly, crash course React, what is it? So React is, a JavaScript library for building UIs. There's not much more to it. If you look at a web page, React can build that. That's what React does. Now, core to React is this idea of a component-driven architecture. So this is where the paradigm shift starts to come in. So rather than building a web page just straight up, you start to reason about it in these components, these individual pieces, and then you combine those to build your UI. Immediately follows from that point that it removes a lot of complexity using this layer of abstraction called React Fiber. Very, very cool what they've done there. As for why we use it, I think it's important to understand why you're using the tech you're using. It allows you to appreciate it more. Most obvious one is it allows rapid development of UIs. If you've ever used some form of framework, or it doesn't even have to be for building web pages. It simplifies your life, and it makes, like a game engine, for example, a lot of the stuff is done for you, so you can just focus on building what you want to build. I think what's really special about React as well is the massive ecosystem and community it brings with it. It's not just having an answer to your query on Stack Overflow. It's much more than that. There are so many quality libraries, and just loads of communities follow with that. So if you want to use a particular library, you have so much to go off just from that. And lastly, it makes developers' lives easier. We're going to come back to that right at the end and explain how. Now, first new concept with React is this idea of components. So a component is just a JavaScript function that represents some part of a user interface. So maybe a button, a profile card, or maybe a footer, even a header, for example. And we can customize these functions, these components, by passing in what are called props. They're basically another name for, arguments or parameters. I don't really know why they changed the name there. And they allow us to customize those components. So maybe having one profile card with one image and another profile card with another image. That's where the props come in. JSX, now this allows us to embed JavaScript into HTML. So it's sort of like an escape hatch. If we want to render some dynamic value, this is where JSX comes in. It's similar to other template languages like Ginger. If you're doing 139, you will definitely encounter that, maybe later weeks. Except browsers don't actually understand this, because at the end of the day, all our code gets put onto the browser, and the browser can only understand one specific type of JavaScript. And JSX does not come under that umbrella. So it goes through this process of being transpiled. It's a bit like compiling, but not really. It's more about getting the code into a format that the browser can understand rather than a computer can understand. Might be a little bit wrong with that statement, because I think... Anyways, so here's an example component. So on the left, we have, a React component. and on the right, what it represents. Now, there shouldn't be anything like too complicated about this, at least, line by line, we're declaring a function. What might look a little strange on the first line is, we're capitalizing, the name of the function, and it looks like we're passing in an object. We sort of are, and we will get to that when we get to the coding part, but it's not necessarily, that's, JavaScript destructuring right there. Now we'll skip the rendered tags thing for now, and we'll just go straight to the return statement. So we're basically just returning some HTML. There's nothing too fancy about this. We're applying some CSS classes to each tag. And then if we look at the h2 tag near the bottom, we have these curly braces and then title. That's JSX. So those curly braces represent we're escaping into JavaScript. And we're basically passing in that title parameter, that prop, and just placing it there. And this is where the idea of customizing them comes in. What might be a little strange, though, is the green tags. It looks like they are HTML tags, but they're not. With a component, we are able to embed other components. And this, this is similar to how, a normal web page is structured. You embed tags and other tags. And it looks like we're passing in like a size and a color parameter. Those are just the props, and they allow us to customize what that component outputs. And I think, you can sort of see the mapping there. We'll be building this component later. Hooks. Now, these are the defining feature of the React library. These are basically special functions that handle, state, side effects, and, the optimization side. Something that we'll come to learn as we progress through this course is they hook in, that's where they get their name, directly into this rendering process that React goes through. React doesn't just show your web page to the browser. There's like this intermediary step, basically called React Fiber. And if you've ever worked with JavaScript or any other language that supports this sort of feature, it all relies on closure, this idea of a function being able to reference values that technically no longer exist. It's a really, really, really impressive way of doing things, and it's just super cool. Previously, I mentioned that React is easier, makes our lives easier. But how? It's so easy to just say something, but not, like this is a good practice, but you don't really explain why. But this course is different. So on the left, we have our normal JavaScript, just simple program. And then on the right, we have the same program implemented as a React component. And it's a simple program. All it does is, if you can imagine like a counter and then a button beneath it, and then every time you press that counter, it increments the value, nothing too complicated. So if we look at the one on the left, we're declaring, a variable count. We need to keep track of the value of the counter. And then if you've ever worked with JavaScript, you need to query the DOM. You need to get that HTML element that you want to then show the value in. And again, we're just referencing it by like its ID. And then we're defining a handler, just a function that is called every time we click the button. Again, it's really simple. We're just incrementing that value, and then we're referencing the HTML tag counter and just changing its content to that variable's value. And then lastly, we're attaching that function to that particular button. Again, nothing too complicated. Now, on the right, it's pretty much the same, but it might look a little strange. So we have like state to track. So we're defining what looks like an array. It's not really an array. Count and like set count. So that's sort of mapping to the counter variable at the top on the left. We're then defining the handler, which is pretty much the same, except we're calling this method set count. This is a hook, and it's telling React to increment this value. And then lastly, we're returning the HTML that represents that counter component. And as you can see, you have the JSX. And what's a little bit different is the on-click. We can directly reference with React the event we want to specify a handler for. We don't need to like, button.event handler sort of thing. But the one thing that's missing here is we're not querying the DOM. And it turns out that is sort of the de facto reason why React makes our lives easier. As your applications grow, and you have to reference the DOM for every little element you want to change, it's like so hard. If you ever worked with a web page before, like a big one, it is so annoying to keep track of. But with React, we can just specify what we want our UI to look like, and it handles all that for us. So, briefly mentioned React Fiber, but what actually is it? React Fiber is the rendering engine that powers React. So whenever we want to make an update to the UI, that's React Fiber. But we're not going to spend too much about time on this because it is very theoretical, and it's thousands of lines long and it's so complicated. But as we progress through the course, we're going to build up a mental model. But for now, we're just going to simplify that mental model dramatically. And similar to how a normal web page is structured, you have your different tags, maybe a div and then like a main tag and an unordered list, and it sort of forms this tree. Now, this diagram is a bit misleading because it's a binary tree, but web pages aren't binary trees necessarily. But you can, if you've ever worked with HTML, you can sort of see how it maps. With React, it's sort of the same, except rather than dealing with HTML tags, we're dealing with components. So each node in that tree represents a component. So I don't know, the top one could represent, I don't know, like some main content where it lists all the profile cards, and then the red one could represent like the content inside that profile card. It doesn't really matter what it represents. It's just that's sort of what a React. It's called the fiber tree rather than like the DOM tree in normal JavaScript. And whenever we want to trigger an update to the UI, so update the counter value, or I don't know, some data load, just something happens that triggers some state change that we want to show to the user, we call a special function, one of those hooks, and then that tells React, signals to React that, hey, so let's say the red component is like, I need to update a value that my component renders. React is then going to send a signal to that component, and it's going to tell it to re-render and all its children. So it's forcing it to destroy itself and then recreate itself to reflect those changes. And it's sort of like what's so cool about React is it constantly destroys and recreates your UI so fast, and it does it like in a split of a second. It's and this process is heavily optimized. So if you think, why do I need to go through this extra step? It just takes too long. I think you'd be surprised. React is so incredibly fast that most apps out there don't even need to be rendered. So that's a brief introduction. So now it's ready to react. But before we quickly do that, just going to show you the course webpage if you haven't seen it already. This is our course webpage. You can see links to the Society Discord server and YouTube channel. And then right below it, we have our session cards. That's a little bit about what each session covers. And then if you click on session 1, you have the code. What's most important to realize, though, is the Stack Blitz. This is an online IDE. It's preloaded with all the content you need. So if you just want to find that, start coding along, you don't need any configuration. Yeah, that's your easiest way to follow along. So now I will get the code up. Now, before we dive right into the coding side, I think it's sensible to think about what we're building. So we briefly introduced this idea of components. So let's, see what could be a component on the page that we're going to build. So I think we can see at this top, we have like this header where it's, the React logo on the left, ready to react, and then like the GitHub icon on the right. So that could be a component. We sort of have this cover, but we might not necessarily need that as a component because it's not very well defined. It's more just specific to the site. As we scroll on, we have these cards, and they're pretty much the same. But they only differ in like the title, the description, and maybe like the link. So that could definitely be a component. And lastly, the footer. So we can sort of already see how we're dividing our UI into these individual components. So now we're going to go over to the code. Couple of things that are worth mentioning. We're not creating, our code from scratch necessarily. If you wanted to do that, you type in like npm create write latest, and that's essentially going to install all the, boilerplate code. And it really acts as like a bundler. if you've ever used React before, you might have come across the term create React app. That's another way of, getting your code and everything. Don't use that one. That's basically been depreciated and it's very slow and it adds so much code that you don't even need. Stick with Vite. It's much faster and it handles loads of things for us. But once that's all done, you just go npm run dev, and that will start the development server. And then, of course, there's nothing to render right now. Just probably spend a minute or two going through the code. So, regardless of the way you install your React, you're always going to have this file. Basically, what this is doing is you can think of the app component as the root of our tree, and it's just rendering that to a singular HTML page called index.html here. And where we see this div id root, basically our entire app is inserted into that. Sounds simple enough. Okay, and then a couple of things that we do have. We have a CSS file. You don't even have to look at that. Our assets folder, that's just images. It's really just for images. And then we have another public folder up here, but that's more for referencing favicon. So if you have the icon in the browser, you can see it the React one on the tab, or the open graph image. That's basically when you share a link in Discord and you have the image, but it's not important. So let's create our first component. I think it's sensible to start with the header. It's right at the top of the page. And yeah, let's do it. So you would want to create we already have the file created. It's header.jsx. It's common practice to capitalize the file names for a component. There's other reasons for this. It sort of signals to React this is a component, so treat it as such. Because there's certain programs such as IntelliSense that will run in the background and check these files for specific rules. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to write export default function header. Now, if we ignore the export default part, and those keywords might be a little bit weird. Export default basically just says, okay, you have a function and this is the default thing that you're exporting. So whenever you're in another file and you want to import this code, that's the thing that's brought in first. Now, next up, we need to return something. We need to return some HTML. So we're then going to render, not render, we're going to do a header tag. We want to be, sensible web developers. We want to have semantic meaning in our tags. Because it's a header, we use a header tag. And then we'll go back to this one. You can see we have an image on the left. But typically what you would do is you would sort of reference a URL. You do some string, but it works a little bit differently in React. We treat our images as sort of variables and we import them into our files. So we would import React logo. You can name anything you like, and then it's stored in the assets folder. So we go assets, and then react.svg, and then what we can do. This has all images take a source attribute, and we can just put it here like that. And of course, again, we want to be responsible web developers, so we give it some alt tag in case the image couldn't load. So React logo, and then there. We also have ready to React is the course name. So we declare a paragraph. We give it a class name. I think the one I gave it was header title, and then ready to React. And then lastly, we have the GitHub link on the right. That can just be represented as an anchor tag. And then I think it was lab, and then ready to React. So yes, but you'll notice we don't have a GitHub logo. And there's a good reason for that. There's this really, really good React library called React Icons. You can search for it on the web. And it comes with like loads of pre-made SVGs that we can easily customize. Really popular library, and I recommend using it if you ever want some form of icon. This is already installed. If you want to know how to install it, I can show it at the end. So we're just going to go import, and the name of the icon we want to import is GitHub. I think it's just that one. And then we reference the library, so it's React icons, and then stick this under that family. And then FA GitHub size. And then we want it to be 24 pixels in width. And then color, we can just do F6, F7, F9. And what we've done here is we've imported a component from another library, and we've passed in these arguments, these props. So it takes a size one and a color. I think it's pretty self-explanatory what those do. And we will show you how we get that on our page. So we'll go back to the app, and the app components essentially represents our entire app. It's like the central point. Yes?
Does the size of like our attribute have to be in curly brackets?
Good question. No, it doesn't. It's just a thing that I do because sometimes you pass in an object where you need the curly braces to represent the JSX. But no, you could do either for a string, but it's just like a thing I do. Yeah. So we'll go back to our app component. And again, this represents sort of the root node, the one at the top, where we insert everything. And then we will import our header component. And then we should see there, we have our first component made. So that's awesome. Now, next up, we sort of have this course cover. Now, you might think, oh, should this be its own component? But not everything needs to be a component, you see. It's sort of unique to this site. So do we really need a component for it? I'd say no, we don't. So we can create it directly here in the app component. So as we can see, we have sort of like, we need some form of container to contain all this data. So going to declare a div, and then we're going to give it the CSS. There we go. And then, of course, we have another image, and it's quite similar to the one we were doing before. We have a source, and then we will import React logo from, was it React? How did I do it? It was from assets. .svg. Just need the single dot logo, and then again, responsible web developers, React logo, just in case the image doesn't load. And then we also have like the title. We can represent that as a header, not a header, a H1, and we give it the CSS name course title with ready to react. And if we go back, we should, there we go. I forgot to put the CSS name on the image, so that was React SVG. Perfect. Next up, we have a short description of the course, like the slogan. Again, that can be a paragraph, so we could do course description as the CSS class, and then the UWCS course on the, oh, yes.
When you type class name, does that get translated to just class in HTML?
Yes, it does. You're exactly right. With React, a lot of the like handlers and the attributes are just camel case. This is a design choice on their part. It really ties into this idea of transpilation. it's a design decision by them, but yes, you are right. On the Ultimate Web Dev Library. And then lastly, we have sort of two buttons, and they're grouped together, so it's sensible to sort of wrap those in a div to represent the overall container. So we'll go like this, and then course links. And then again, these are essentially anchor tags, and they have the CSS of, and then course link color. Discord. Now I'm not going to put in the reference because I mean, a bit pointless. And then we have another one, essentially the same thing. And then we give it just these CSS classes, and then YouTube channel. And then we should have yeah, wait. I think course was spelled incorrectly there. Okay, perfect. So we've done that. Now it's time to do something a bit more exciting. We need a fully customizable component now for these course cards. So let's do that one next. So I will move this over, and we will go to our course card.jsx. And notice the JSX extension, that just notifies, you know, that this is a component. It's just one of those standards that they chose. Okay. So this is going to be a proper component now. So we'll start with importing just a couple of icons. So it's FA React, and then from icons FA. And then we have another component that we are importing from icons.io. And then similar, we want to export this component so it can be used in the app component. Just this syntax, function, course card. Now, I'm going to do the curly braces, and I'll explain why once I've written a bit more. And the things we want to customize in this component are the title, so that's like the session 1, 2, 3, 4, the description, the keywords, and the URL. So we have, you know, this link icon, each icon links to a different, you know, repository. So curly braces might be a little bit weird, and why do we need them? And it really comes down to how our props get passed into a component. Now React will see, you know, let's go to the header where we use the, you know, size and color. It will see this, and it will like group all the props, the size and the color, into an object called props, and then it passes that to the component rather than like this object over here. So what it would actually look like would be like this. And then if we wanted to reference like the title, we'd be like props.title. But this is like verbose, and it's just not nice to write. Wouldn't it be better to just reference the props directly? And there's this feature in JavaScript called destructuring where you can basically pattern match an object and pull out those properties. So for example here, we know we're going to be passing in a title, description, keyword, and URL. So why don't we just pull those out of that props object directly and reference them like this? You will basically see every single React program do it this way. It's very uncommon to use the props thing. So yeah. Next up, we are going to do the easier part first. So if we look, we sort of have this overall container, you know, it's circles on the end. And we can represent that again as like a div, a divider. And we can give that the class name card container. Now it might be a bit hard for you to see because it's like you sort of need to imagine it. But we sort of have this like top row and this bottom row, where the top row has like the React icon and then the link icon, and all the bottom, like the one below it has like the session and all that. The reason it's been done this way, it's easier for the CSS side. So we will do like another div to represent like that top part with card links. And then we will use our component icons, and we'll give it 40 pixels. And then for the color, we could do OGAFF. And then, of course, we have the link icon as well. So we can go here. Now, this is where we're using JSX. So we are referencing the value that is being passed in the URL and just embedding it directly there. And then we are wrapping the icon that we want to use in the anchor tag. So whenever you click on it, you're brought to the link. 32 pixels, and then color, I think we gave it, what was it? 53670, something like that. There we go. Okay, so we've done that. Now, next up, we need to implement the session and like all the useful information. So we can represent that as another, title. We can do a H2 because it's not, the name of the site, and it can be card title. And we can reference that value directly by using the curly braces to, say we're referencing this prop, this JavaScript value, just like that. And then right beneath it, we have the course description for that session. So card description, and then just like that, just like the previous one. Now, this is where things get a little bit interesting, and this is sort of the topic for next week. So I'm just going to write it and briefly explain what it does now. So we're passing these keywords, and we can represent these keywords as a JavaScript array, and it can be of varying size. For session 1, we have components, JSX state, and then further down, we have like side effects, dependencies, and data fetching. How could we need a way of somehow mapping that array into like HTML, but we don't know the size of the array. So wouldn't it be great if we could iterate over this array and sort of create HTML on the fly? And this is where we do this. So we're declaring a variable rendered tags, and we're going to go here, and we're going to map over this array. So if you haven't used the map function in JavaScript, it basically iterates over it and transforms each element into like a new element. And what we can do is it takes the first argument, it pulls us as the value of that array at that index. So we can say tag, for example. And then we're going to go just like this. And we can see our keywords can sort of be represented as an unordered list. This is quite common. And each child of an unordered list is just a list item. So we can go here, and then this key isn't a HTML attribute, it's a React specific thing. For now, just ignore it. It's going to be the entire topic of next week. But it's a sort of an optimization thing. And we'll pass in the tag, and then we do class name card tag. And then again, we're referencing that value directly. And now we'll just create the unordered list. Rendered tags. So we have our component. Let's start using it. We'll go back to the app component, and let's just get the reference. Cool. So we can sort of visualize this, this section with all the course cards as like its own container. So again, we use a div, and then apply the CSS class container. And then we can start using our component. So course card, we've just imported it, and we can pass in the props. So first one is the title. So we can do session 1, and then we have the description. I'm just going to leave that. Actually, no, I can just reference it here. That is wonderful. Go like that. And then we have our keywords. So we can pass that in as an array. So I think it was like components, JSX, and state. And lastly, the URL. I will leave that blank just because that is long to write out. And then we'll close off the component just like that. Course card. I think there might be a slight error. What did I not say? Course card, cards container. Oh, there we go. That's the issue. I wrapped in the wrong place. So we'll go there. Cards container, course cover. I think one of the properties, cards container. We'll come back to that. So of course we have 5 cards. That one should be capitalized, just like that. Now, to save time, I'm not going to write out in each individual component. So we'll just copy and paste it a couple times. And then one more time. And then, we have our cards. We'll go to the bottom one and just give it session 5. Yeah, and I mean, this is the great thing about components. You can just reuse them and throw them anywhere you want. We could add in like 100 of these, customize them as much as we want. So yes, any questions on like the component that we just created? All good? Okay, awesome. So we have 5 minutes left. We won't be able to introduce state today, so we'll just finish off the footer component. Again, this is like super simple, this one. It's right at the bottom here. It's just a bit of text. So we will start. First of all, we need to import the society logo. That's in the assets folder. Logo from, and then we reference the assets folder, .png, and then export default function footer. And just pay attention to the we're capitalizing all our components. This is required by React. File names, not so much, but component names, yes, because it allows React to differentiate between a normal HTML tag and a React component. This matters quite a lot, but we'll come back to that in the future. And then there's nothing that we really need to customize with this component. So we can just declare it as a footer, and then brought to you by Computer Science Society. And lastly, we'll reference the image. Logo. And then, of course, responsible web developers, UWCS logo. Oh, that's not spelt correctly. Logo. Oh, source. There we go. And the good thing about referencing the source this way, we're sort of treating our logo, our images as variables. This is really handy as UIs render based on like loads of different states. So handling, a variable rather than a string, turns out makes our lives easier. Now, lastly, we will go into the app and then implement the footer. And then we'll go back to our actual code. And yeah, I think there's a slight issue with one of the classes. Card container. It's not really, it doesn't matter. I might have just done like a typo somewhere. But yeah, there should be a gap there. So we've got like 2 minutes left. I was meant to introduce state today. We'll start that next week, and we'll just like spend 1 minute on React Wisdom. Today will be quite boring, and it's just a useful resource, and that is the React docs. Now, as you can see, they clearly copied the course webpage. Look, like they're using our designs. How bad? But when you learn React, these docs are absolutely amazing. Documentation in the past for other tools isn't that great. It comes across as a bit like scientific and technical, but with React, it's amazing. And this should be your first place to go if you ever have any bugs or like questions or want to learn something new, because it really is like a course in itself, the docs. So if we went to like use state, they like give you everything you need, common pitfalls, quizzes. So yeah, this is the first resource you should be using. And I think that about brings today to an end. I think it went all right, and thank you all for coming.